If you're serious about military history and survival craft, subscribe to this channel now, because what we're covering today is one of those rare cases where battlefield innovation quietly rewrote the rules and never got the attention it deserved. This is not trivia. This is applied deception, learned under fire, and it still matters. What you're about to hear explains how a World War II camouflage system became so effective that enemy troops repeatedly failed to even register what they were looking at, and how the logic behind it is still used by modern militaries and field survivalists today. Why this camouflage mattered long before most soldiers even understood concealment. In the early years of World War II, most armies still treated camouflage as decoration rather than science. Uniforms were dyed one colour and expected to work everywhere: forests, cities, snow or rubble. What changed everything was the realization that concealment wasn't about blending in perfectly, but about breaking recognition. This is where the German-developed splinter pattern, formerly known as Splittertarnmuster, enters the story. Introduced in the 1930s and refined during the war, it was issued widely to elements of the Wehrmacht and airborne units. What made it revolutionary was not colour choice alone, but geometry, scale and disruption. How Splittertarnmuster exploited the human brain rather than the landscape. The splinter pattern worked because it attacked how the eye and brain process shapes. Human vision is exceptionally good at identifying vertical and horizontal outlines that resemble the human body. Splitter disrupted that recognition by using sharp angular polygons layered with rain-like vertical strokes. These shapes didn't attempt to mimic trees or leaves. Instead, they prevented the eye from assembling a complete silhouette. Allied after-action reports repeatedly described German positions that were walked past at distances that should have been fatal for concealment. Soldiers weren't invisible. They simply never registered as human targets. Why did this pattern work especially well in European terrain? Well, most people assume camouflage must match foliage colour exactly, but Splittertarnmuster didn't. Its palette of muted greens, browns and grey tans functioned across seasons and environments. In bombed-out villages, broken forests and ploughed farmland, the pattern echoed shattered terrain rather than living vegetation. This is why it remained effective, even when uniforms became dirty, faded, or partially torn. For modern survivalists, this principle really matters. Absolute colour matching is fragile. Shape disruption is durable. There's also the often overlooked role of scale and distance in battlefield camouflage. One reason enemies failed to spot troops wearing this pattern was scale mismatch. At close range, the shapes looked abstract. At medium and long distances, those same shapes visually merged into irregular tonal blocks. This prevented the eye from locking onto recognizable proportions like shoulders, helmets, or weapon outlines. How airborne units proved its effectiveness under the harshest conditions is quite telling. German Fallschirmjäger units used Splittertarnmuster extensively in airborne operations, where concealment failures were instantly lethal. During drops and regrouping phases, troops often remained undetected despite being within visual range of enemy patrols. British intelligence assessments acknowledged the difficulty of spotting German paratroopers once grounded, particularly when stationary. This isn't myth. It's documented battlefield frustration. When concealment works against trained observers actively searching for you, it has crossed into elite-level effectiveness. What modern militaries quietly borrowed from this design philosophy is rather fascinating. Post-war camouflage development across NATO and Warsaw Pact forces shows clear inheritance from splinter principles. East German Strichtarn and later disruptive digital patterns trace their logic directly back to this World War II innovation. The idea that camouflage should fracture outlines rather than imitate nature became standard doctrine. If you're studying survival concealment today, this is where the lineage begins. It's not about leaves sewn onto fabric, it's about denying recognition under stress. If you're building a concealment setup in woodland or semi-urban terrain, prioritize broken geometry over naturalistic prints. Use angular fabric overlays, staggered panels, and irregular cuts. When positioning yourself, avoid straight lines created by posture or equipment. Rotate slightly, break symmetry, and let your outline collapse into background noise. This is exactly what Splittertarnmuster achieved on a mass scale. You don't need a wartime uniform to apply wartime logic. Why did this pattern remain effective even as enemy awareness increased? One might assume that once the Allies recognized the pattern, its advantage vanished. It didn't. Recognition does not equal detection. Under combat stress, fatigue, and poor lighting, the human brain reverts to pattern shortcuts. Splittertarnmuster exploited those shortcuts relentlessly. Even trained observers missed what they were technically aware of. That is the highest standard camouflage can achieve. Why does this still matter for serious historians and survival professionals? Understanding this pattern isn't nostalgia. It's understanding how deception operates under pressure. World War II forced rapid innovation because mistakes meant death. When something worked, it spread quietly and persisted. Splittertarnmuster didn't just hide soldiers, it reshaped how armies thought about concealment itself. If this kind of deep, practical military history matters to you, subscribe to the Legacy of Survival channel. Share this with fellow historians and fieldcraft enthusiasts, and keep this knowledge alive. The past still teaches, if you're willing to study it properly.